Au descoperit adevărul într-o țară unde ortodoxii sunt minoritari. Au ales să trăiască în ortodoxie și să mărturisească dreapta credință în America. Dr. Daniel Hinshaw, profesor de chirurgie și paleație la Universitatea Medicală din Michigan și la seminarul Sfântul Vladimir din New York, și Dr. Jane Hinshaw, instructor clinic de psihiatrie la aceeași universitate, colaborează de ani buni cu personalul din Hospisul pentru îngrijiri paliative Casa Speranței din Brașov. Susținătorii ai programului de îngrijiri paliative din România au contribuit foarte mult la înființarea unei rețele de unități de îngrijire paliativă. Noi i-am întâlnit de curând în capitală, unde au susținut o conferință pentru preoții de caritate din București și Ilfov, și am avut ocazia să le cunoaștem povestea. Astăzi, Secvențe Trinitas vă invită într-o călătorie spre lumină.
The first question is, of course, why Orthodoxy? How did you discover the Orthodoxy? Who was the first one?
I think the experience for me came as a teenager when I was struggling with trying to understand what the church is. And then telling my mother, who was quite concerned at the time, that I didn't think it was the Protestant church that we belonged to.
How did she react when you told her?
She was very worried about me. And that I knew there was a historic church, and I wanted to find that. And then later at the university, as a college student, I ran into the newly published book by Timothy Ware, who is now Bishop Callistos Ware, on the Orthodox Church, and was very intrigued by the book. I visited the local Greek Orthodox Church, and they looked at me like, "You're not Greek? What are you doing here?" And I kind of got scared away for a few years. Believers, I think both of us grew up as believing Protestant Christians, but we weren't entirely satisfied with that. We thought there was something missing.
But we really knew we weren't Protestant, and we were continuing to search until my boss came, and he is an Antiochian Orthodox Christian. They started taking us to church his brother-in-law was a priest. So we started going to church with them, and eventually they sponsored us as our godparents when we were chrismated in '95.
It was a beautiful experience. It was it felt like there was a sense of completion.
I think that's really the best descriptor, is the fullness of the faith, because as Protestants we really hadn't been introduced to the church fathers and all of the richness of the church through the centuries. So that's been so exciting to have a never-ending well from which to drink.
What was the first change you felt?
As physicians, have felt a strong vocation to serve and help the sick, but it wasn't until we became Orthodox Christians that we realized how important, how central the Church's understanding of what suffering is really informs the whole process of healthcare, of charitable kinds of activities. And so we had to rethink medicine.
You were a surgeon back then.
Mm-hmm. And I continued to be a surgeon for a number of years. I was also a hospital administrator. At the time, about the time I became Orthodox, I was also appointed as the chief of the medical services at our hospital. And I remember telling the hospital director, who was my immediate supervisor, that I saw we were focused too much on curing disease only and not really addressing the suffering of our patients. And I don't think I would have come to that realization without the Orthodox understanding. And he kind of looked at me like, well, that's nice. But then it began to come out in practical ways, and so I wanted to address the care of the dying in our hospital. And Jane had already been caring for the psychiatric needs of our patients in the AIDS clinic, and at that time they were all dying. They were all terminally ill. And so she was already seeing a practical way of applying this.
Reconciliation.
So she was seeing people who had lived very reckless lives growing up very quickly when they were facing their own death.
It seems like a hard work to do. I think you have to be strong too.
Well, it's joyful to be able to meet people at the place where they're really suffering, and obviously we can't do the work without being grounded in our faith and having the strength that God gives us and the healing that He gives to them.
Have you ever felt the presence of God, His help?
Oh, absolutely.
Can you give
All
me
the time.
an example?
And since we're all icons of Christ, it's really important for us to, especially important for us as physicians, to see Christ in those that we're interacting with and trying to help.
After becoming Orthodox, I was more acutely aware of the fact that any good outcome, or they're all in the hands of God.
You told me you are a surgeon and now you work in palliative care. Why palliative care?
So
this is also an effect from being
from
an
becoming
Orthodox.
Yeah.
Yes.
I wanted to care for the whole person that I had been operating on. There were a lot of my cancer patients that I operated on. I knew I didn't cure them, and I wasn't sure what happened to them afterwards. And I didn't have a way to address their care because I didn't know how to care other than as an operating surgeon. And so when I obtained the training in palliative medicine, I came back, and for several years I practiced surgery and palliative medicine together. And I remember talking to my father, who was a retired surgeon, about this, and I told him, I said, this is the first time I feel like a complete physician. And so it was an extraordinary kind of experience. And he told me in a very kind of tearful voice that 50 years before, when he was training as a young surgeon, that he was given an assignment. They were all given an assignment to take care of a ward of dying patients. And the surgery trainees, the residents, got this assignment because they could take care of the wounds of people with advanced cancers and so on. But they knew nothing about how to treat the pain. And he said it was the worst nightmare that he'd ever experienced as a young physician, because he didn't have the tools on how to do it. And he said he was so glad that I was learning these tools so that I could help train others to meet this deficiency. So I felt like I had sort of had my father's blessing coming out of that additional training.
So one of these tools is the religion, I suppose.
The religion has to infuse everything. It has to be the foundation, the grounding. Our spiritual life has to inform our practice.
But with palliative care and psychiatry, it's a natural fit. No.
So they, at the end, they discover God.
When people would come to me, I would usually try to address the concerns they had in coming, but then when they stabilized, I would challenge them and say, now if you really want to be well, let's talk about sort of approaching your suffering, and you've got to take care of yourself physically and be responsible in your habits of life. You've got to maintain good psychological health that we've worked towards together. We've got to work on the relationships, the reconciliation. And most of all, you need to grow spiritually. And that has to start where they're at. But even if people are not religious, I challenge them. We all are looking for meaning in our life, and that's a place to start. And hopefully they'll ultimately find God. But that has to be their journey. When we teach at seminary, I tell the priests that my job is to prepare them for them, that I need to get them stable and psychologically healthy, then they can be more open to the spiritual healing.
Why Romania? You told me about a journey. Let's talk about your journey here.
We have been blessed to live near a Romanian monastery in Michigan. It's the monastery dedicated to the Dormition of the Mother of God. Mother Gabriella is the abbess, and the spiritual father for many years was Father Roman Braga, and we were very blessed to become acquainted over the years with them and felt a very special bond to them and the Romanian roots there, and that also endeared us to the country.
And that led to a Google search of hospice kinds of activities, and that led to, inevitably, to connecting with Dr. Daniela Moșoiu, who is really one of the major pioneers of hospice work in Romania. I wrote an email to her and told her what my situation was, that I would be coming with this theologian and priest, that I was an Orthodox Christian, and she said, "Oh, that's very interesting. I'm Orthodox too, and my husband is a priest, and he's a theologian who teaches at the theological faculty in Sibiu, and by all means, please come." And so we became good friends. That was in 2005. Later, we worked for a couple of years on planning a large conference.
So another answer to how we found Romania is it's just like an incredible treat for us to come to a country where there's all of these wonderful churches everywhere, all of these wonderful monasteries, and we've only scratched the surface of exploring them, but it's just such a joy between our work to be able to go and have a retreat at some of the monasteries and churches and worship.
We would have to get in our car and drive a significant distance to find an Orthodox church in America. Here you can walk down the street and have your pick. It's a real
very
blessing.
exciting for us.
What was the first church you visited here?
Sfânta Treme, the Holy Trinity Church that's in the old center of Brașov.
Tell me about a patient, your first patient.
And this is about a woman in Bucharest. I saw on a home visit a few years ago. And I'll never forget this woman. She was about 80 years old, and she was lying on a bed in the back of an apartment, and she had had a skin cancer that had invaded and destroyed one eye. And then they had tried to treat that, and the tumor came back, and it now was invading and had made her blind in the remaining eye. And her face was, as you might imagine, very disfigured. But surrounding her on the walls, her husband had already died a few years before, but surrounding her on the walls were pictures of her in her youth in the 1940s, and she was a very beautiful woman. And the contrast was very striking. She was very thin and frail, and she was lying there, and so I could only communicate through translation. But I could touch her. I could touch her hand, and she had a very firm grip, and so we held hands, and then I talked through the translation, and asked her what she was hoping for, and she knew she was dying. She said, "Oh, if I could see one more time, that would be a wonderful blessing." And she was a devout Orthodox, and I asked her, because sometimes this is very important, that people near the end of life, they sometimes have these experiences. I said, "Have you had any dreams lately? Vivid ones?" And she said, "I did. I had a dream a few days ago." And I said, "What did you see?" And she smiled and she said, "I saw the Mother of God, and she came and she healed me." So she did have her prayer answered. She saw, at least in the dream, she saw someone much more special than she would see with her native vision. Yes, it's a sad, very sad moment when people die. He conquers death. This is why he's here. And our role as Christian laypersons, as health professionals, as the clergy, is to help each other as we make this journey.
So we need to accept and learn that this is not the end, basically.
This is just the beginning.
How did you see death before being a Christian?
surgeons always do this. You have sort of philosophical discussions in the locker room after an operation. And I remember talking to some colleagues and say, well, what, you know, how would you want to die? And, oh, I'd want to die in my sleep, or die suddenly.
Without
now,
pain.
Now I want to know that I'm going to die, and I want a slow process that will help prepare me. I need lots of time to repent and to prepare. So it's changed quite a bit.
What about you?
Well, you had asked us before about the three words
To
in
describe
Orthodox,
the orthodoxy, yeah.
that for us is the epitome of what we've learned, and I think those would be Christ is risen, because it really has to infuse our whole life, and seeing death as something that Christ really has conquered, and now he's risen and we live with the risen Lord. That, I think, has just really been the profound thing for us that's changed how we've lived our own lives, but professional lives as well.
And if you wanted the one word, I'd say it's life. Orthodoxy is life.